So my name is Marco Steinberg, and I have a small practice called Snow Cone and Haystack. So I work independently. I have a passion for innovative government, and I think really what I mean by that is responding to the need for governments to transform from the way they do sort of business today to one that's much more effective. Yeah.
So what do you think the barriers are so far that you've experienced, and why that's perhaps not happening?
I think at the end of the day, the barriers are leadership barriers. And I've been actually in several meetings very high up in government where some of these themes have been debated, and it's astounding to see how afraid people are of making decisions about things that they've never experienced themselves. And when we talk about design, broadly speaking, it is a subject matter that is foreign. So I can see the brain ticking and people going like, I get it, but there isn't the sort of fortitude to say, and I'll try it.
There are some things happening and some things being tried out reasonably well across Europe. How do we scale that? When you mentioned capabilities as being one of those things, what can we all do to raise the profile of what's happening and also create the skills and capacity needed to create momentum?
I think there's several things. First of all, the design debate, which for me at the end of the day is about transforming government. The stakes need to be much higher. So I think it doesn't help the case for design to do 1,000 euro projects. It needs to do 1 million euro projects because it gets people's attention in a very different way, and it does put then very different kind of pressure. I think the public sector also needs to recruit in a very different way, bring talent in very different ways. So there could be people who are recruited from different sectors, but there could be different modes also. I think this kind of firewall between consultancies and the public sector, while I understand it from procurement and sort of positions of fairness is good, it really limits the kind of continual and collegial learning that can happen. I also think that design needs to also then deliver, which it is in pockets, and use those achievements as the platform for conversations, as opposed to have conversations around the promise of delivery. And fourthly, I would say actually one of the most important things is for people in government leadership positions who get it, who are advocates for this work, to find them and have them have peer-to-peer conversations. It is so much more powerful to have a state secretary from one country talk to another state secretary than for a designer and outsider to try to convince them through rhetoric.
So maybe another interesting angle might be, is the design industry ready, perhaps, for the challenge that faces in terms of scaling up an interest in that sector?
I think that's an excellent question. It's been an area of great preoccupation for me, and I know many of our colleagues. I think in the last few years, if you look what's happened across Europe, that we've began to make, I think, a coherent argument for the need of innovation and the role of design in that public sector innovation task. My biggest fear is leaders saying, I get it, picking up the phone, and there's no one to answer. And I think you do that in a couple of ways. I think one primary way is for the public sector to recognize this has to be an active effort of building capabilities, which means, goes back to one of the points I was trying to make, is creating career paths. I think we need internships, we need different kinds of things that allow people in their early formative stages to bring their design education into a very different context and do that very difficult translational job of taking principles that work great in the classroom into a messy world. So this is a big concern. Do we have the capacity? And I think then we also need to find other ways of creating sort of what would traditionally be sort of academic formation. So I think schools are tremendously behind, the traditional schools, on this. I think they need to move very quickly, and I think they need to be much more progressive in the kinds of offerings that allow traditional professionals to bridge the knowledge gap to do public sector work. I think there's a whole other aspect of this is I think we need to just create greater design literacy among non-designers. And that's why I was advocating, I think, for a system that has everybody at least aware of the kind of language and existence of innovation practices. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen, and if you don't have that base, it's very hard to build everything else on that.
So a really good question then for us in respect of the Design for Europe project is how do we better help raise awareness?
Yeah.
And what can we do as a sort of project team, as a community of practice around this sort of challenge, do to emphasise that point better?
I think in design we advocate a lot designing for the customer, or I like to say designing for the citizen, and taking a sort of citizen-centric approach. I think in events there will be a tendency for people to self-select, meaning people who have an interest in something will go to that place. I think we need to become much better at understanding this other audience and figuring out how we have a conversation on their terms, not our terms. So it's going into the less understanding audiences, figuring really out what ticks in their world, what really matters in their world, and taking that and positioning it in this design debate, as opposed to trying to make an argument for design and hoping that this sits well within their realities. So I would advocate we need to get a little more uncomfortable and go out to those who may not be so friendly. Not because they're mean, but because what we're doing is irrelevant, and figure out how we make it relevant based on their logics.
I work for Estonian Information Authority, and I work for Estonian state portal eesti.ee. I'm an analyst who is working mostly with service design, prototyping and testing.
So how have you tried to encourage a different way of thinking?
Those authorities are like my users, so for them I'm presenting different possibilities, different tools they could use. I'm helping them to make their service better. Practically, I have been helping many authorities starting to think who are their users, how they should continue, how do users use services, and then I have helped them doing prototypes and as well with testing.
And how have they responded to that challenge of embracing prototyping as a new approach?
Differently, because not always they have time and resources for that. Not always they are the project that has been done for making the e-service has been planned like this. Sometimes they come with an idea that they want to have an e-service, and they have a time schedule, they have already resources, but when they see that we want them to make the prototype as a obstacle because we don't have time for that. But once in a while, of course, we are really happy, and they see that their idea actually, when we see it on online as a prototype, but it looks much different than we thought in the beginning expected.
And is it something that you're continuing to have to build the relationship and the trust in the new tools and approaches?
Yeah. Once more.
So are you having to continually win over new advocates or new people on board?
At the moment, in our team, we don't have new people on board, but yes, I'm continuing to present what are the tools, and we have new authorities who come with our e-services, so it's a process starting again from the beginning.
Very good. And have you got any advice for maybe teams that have yet to start on this track by way of the benefits? So how would you convince someone else to get involved in using these principles in their work?
That's a difficult question. question.
Is it through sort of measurement and impact, sort of demonstrating the results?
Yes, demonstrating the results is one of the possibility, but I think how to make them or understand why to use these kind of tools is also to give them case studies, like good something good that has already been done, to give an overview of that, examples. That is something that works if they see that somebody else has done it. Why, what happened, how much did you spend time, money, etc., and what was the end result. That is something effective.